Our story today starts in 1681, or thereabouts. We're joining a Dominican father named Francisco de Bergoa. He, along with a group of other men, are standing at the edge of the ancient Zapotec city of Mitla, or kind of more accurately, on top of it, but we'll get back to that. Now, Francisco was a complicated man. He had a deep fascination with the indigenous cultures of the Zapotec and the Mixtec, some of the indigenous peoples of Mexico. And despite being the descendant of conquistadors, he took the time to learn the languages of these people. He seems to have had a genuine fascination with their history as well. On the other hand, like many of the Europeans of his time, he felt that all these people were engaged in devil worship, and being a member of the church, he felt it was his duty to stamp this out. That's why he and these men were at Mitla, because this city was the spiritual heart of the Zapotec people. And in fact, despite its really high and cold location in this valley called Tlacoluca Valley, the city had become famous even outside of the Zapotec. Other tribes, like the famous Aztec, had heard of the city of Mitla too. They called it Mictlan. And in fact, I should say, the name I'm using, Mitla, it's a modern play on the Aztec word for this city. It's not what the Zapotec themselves would have called this place. No, the name that the Zapotecs themselves used for this mysterious city was Lyobaa. And that name means something. And actually, if we want to do this properly, you should picture our friend Francisco standing at the edge or at the top of Lyobaa. And this name, its proper name, actually means the same thing as the Aztec name, or similar. It means place of rest, or more bluntly, place of the dead. And this city, Lyobaa, was believed to contain a portal to the Underworld. And the reason I keep telling you that Francisco is standing on top of Lyobaa, on top of this city, is because, well, yes, there were beautiful, amazing buildings that we'll look at in Lyobaa that were above ground. The city today and then was most famous for its subterranean structures. Lyobaa was, in fact, a city built on top of a tunnel system and labyrinth of darkened passageways and tombs and halls, and most importantly, like I said, that portal to the realm of the dead. The Zapotec nobility and priesthood had for centuries now added to and maintained this city underneath their city, a place where those kings and priests were buried with ceremony, where rituals of spiritual power would take place, and a place where sacrifices killed for favor of the gods would be thrown. Many below ground rooms and halls held secrets as well as the dead, and sometimes it even held the living. And the Zapotec priests had long preached to the people that the honored dead down here held feasts in spiritual glory, only to eventually be reborn in the heavens as cloud people, where they would watch over the citizens below and protect them. Francisco and his team would investigate this underground tunnel system, or try to. They hoped to convince the Zapotec people to give up their indigenous faith and funeral practices in favor of Christianity. And to do that, they needed to prove to the people that this underground sanctuary, this maze of darkness and mystical practices, was not the home of their feasting ancestors, as the high priest of the city had claimed. And so they did try to explore this place, but try being the operative word. And instead of succeeding in conquering their fears of this tunnel system, what Francisco and his men saw in that place would both terrify them and cause the future of the Zapotec people to change drastically. And in 1681, when he and his men completed their investigation, he ordered that all entrances to this underground tunnel system be sealed up permanently, with a church even being built over the main entrance to both establish Christianity's authority now in this region, and also, they claimed, to keep the devil from escaping from below. What happened? What did they see down there? Did they see anything down there? Is this story completely made up? After all, we know that the Spaniards would sometimes embellish their stories, at times heavily when dealing with the indigenous populations of the Americas, at times going out of their way to make them seem as barbaric and crude as possible. And Francisco's account for a long time was kind of dismissed as an exaggeration or an outright lie. In more modern times, people have looked a little bit closer at some of his accounts and realized when you are able to look past the filter of militant Christianity that he has and just look at what he's written, let's just say that viewpoints on Francisco have been changing recently. Well, I'm not a history expert or anything, I'm just a nerd, but I've been fascinated by this for a while, so I've hunted down some rare English translations of Francisco's original account. But not only that, but just this past year, some groundbreaking new discoveries have been made at Mitla by modern-day archaeologists. And this new analysis leaves little doubt that there is a tunnel system or something underneath the city of Lyobaa. But what lies down there? Could it truly be some sort of portal to the underworld? How far and how deep do these tunnels go? Only one way to find out. Hello, my name is Marie, and welcome to Lost Realms. Each episode, we look at a different city, place, or people that have been lost to us. Whether through the destruction of a disaster, the ravages of climatic changes, the failure of governments, or the cruelty of neighbors. Each one of these wonderful places and people were taken from us forever. The Zapotec are fascinating, and I should say they're far from the only ancient culture to have believed in a world beneath our own, or that going into a cave could lead you into the realm of the dead or connect you to the underworld. In fact, different parallels to this belief can be found throughout human history and even also just in ancient Mexico. But the Zapotecs' take on the underworld and their unique tunnel system is truly fascinating and very mysterious, obviously. We're going to take a look at the history of the Zapotec people. We're going to go over Francisco's account that I mentioned to you. And hopefully after all this, we'll have learned a little bit more about this enigmatic and spiritual place of rest beneath the earth. The Zapotec of Mexico are part of an ancient culture stretching back here for centuries. And of course, there's been many other beautiful cultures to rise in this part of the world for thousands of years. But the Zapotec themselves seem to have emerged as an independent culture around 500 BC, and they quickly rose to prominence in the southern highlands of Mesoamerica, dominating the Oaxaca Valley, as well as several other areas in ancient Mexico. They quickly grew in population and started leaving us some of the amazing and sophisticated cities that we see from them today. And some of these buildings that they've left behind are absolutely breathtaking. They are known today for their beautiful frescoes and mosaics, creating some of the most unique and striking artwork seen anywhere in the Americas. And they would continue to grow and evolve from their formative years in 500 BC all the way up until the Spanish arrival in 1521. They existed so long that their society underwent many different changes and also came under the influence of other cultures like the Mixtec. They also developed an extremely sophisticated and structured society with clearly differentiated class systems, and religious and political life were very much tied together. According to some sources, the chief high priest of the people may have even had status over the king himself, with early Spanish visitors liking this figure to their own pope. And our city of Mitla seems to have been the home of this high chief priest. The Zapotec also had a complex religious system involving many different deities. We can also learn a little about their ancient culture and way of life and spirituality from their buildings and architecture. The Zapotec were incredibly sophisticated and advanced. Some of the buildings and artwork they've left behind is still a mystery to us, honestly, how they made. They're huge megalithic structures that you're seeing some pictures of here were joined together so perfectly and are so large just in scale that we're still figuring out how they built some of these things. And not only that, but the purpose of some of these buildings. For example, at Mount Alban, another major Zapotec settlement, in fact, their capital for most of their history, had an observatory building that was clearly designed for astronomy for the night sky. The building is designed for a certain alignment, and inside of it has kind of tunnel-like passageways to get you to be able to look in certain directions. Meanwhile, all the way around the building, they cleared the ground of any boulders or anything that could obstruct the vision. Not only that, but the building itself contains something called a zenith tube. Now, a zenith tube is a feature that you'll see in some ancient observatories as well as some modern ones, where a shaft will be made exposing the night sky, but at a certain alignment because it's meant to pick up a certain astronomical alignment. You can look up and see your star or whatever aligned directly over the zenith tube overhead. Now that's a very non-expert basic explanation, and as always there'll be information in the sources in the top comment below. To sum this up even further, a zenith tube makes it easy for you to keep track of and see when a certain astronomical alignment takes place. And our astronomical alignment seems to be the rising of a certain star in a certain constellation. This star, today by us called Capella, seems to have risen directly overhead over this spot at the exact date that the observatory itself was constructed. And like I said, this zenith tube is lined up, so when that happens, the light will come down through this tube. Now, why this star, Capella, and probably its larger constellation known as Auriga, were so important to the Zapotec, we don't really know. But the fact that they would be able to and desire to build an entire monumental structure around the rising of this one star and to be able to track it so accurately is just astounding. And I think this shows, again, the complexity and sophistication of these people, and we still have so much left to learn about their past. And of course, one of the things that we're most curious about is learning what they use this tunnel system for. As I mentioned, for a long time, people weren't even sure if this tunnel system actually existed. However, in relatively modern times, extremely small tunnels were found to be built into the ancient Zapotec capital of Mont Alban. Now, these tunnels themselves are still a mystery, but this led credence to Francisco's account that there could also be tunnels under Lyobaa. Francisco claimed that the main entrance was located underneath a church that was specifically built, like I mentioned, for that purpose. And since by modern times the church was one of the oldest buildings left at the site, and because by modern times I think too a little bit Mexico is a very Christian nation, no one wanted to risk damaging the church to see if there were these tunnels or tunnel entrance actually underneath of it. Before we dive into the more modern analysis of things, I'd like to stop here and read to you the account of Francisco, or at least one translation of it, to give you an idea of his view of what he saw going on down there. Now, a word of caution before I proceed. The Spanish colonizers in modern times have become a little bit famous for hyping up the goriness and especially the cannibalism of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And they had a really concrete reason for wanting to do this, because especially if a tribe was known to be cannibalistic, then Queen Isabella of Spain said it was okay to enslave them. Now, this isn't to say that they were all hippies in real life either, like peace-loving hippies. No. But I do want to say that before I read you Francisco's account, to make it clear that I am aware, and I hope all of you are aware, that when we encounter these Spanish accounts from this time period, we do have to take them with a grain of salt and really think about what we're reading. All of that being said, not every single Spanish person that came to the New World during this time period was a butthole. Not every single one of them was evil to the core. Yes, all of them came over with their preconceived cultural bias, and many of them were very racist or bigoted towards the indigenous people. But even that's not true across the board. People are complicated, and our Francisco, the man that was standing at the edge of Mitla that went down into the tunnels, the man whose account I'm about to read to you, as I mentioned, in modern times, he is thought to be mostly accurate. Now, when I read to you this account, I'm not going to censor the parts that don't make him look good. Like you're going to hear, he believes all these people are devil worshippers and he needs to save them. But on that note, he does seem to be genuinely concerned with their well-being. And I found a sample of his account from this time where he describes the Zapotec ritual. And crucially, he describes a priest taking a piece of human flesh, putting it to his lips, not eating it, and putting it back. Now that's a big deal for me and for a lot of historians, because that proves right there, he's not trying to make them look like cannibals. He's not trying to make them look gory and as bad as he can possibly make them. He would know how to do that. He's not doing that here. So even though when I read this to you, there's going to be a clear cultural bias, there's going to be a clear religious bias, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that. But that doesn't mean that he's not telling the truth. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't care about what he's doing and the people that he's seeing. So with all that in mind, Let's find out what Francisco saw in those tunnels. First, let's start with Francisco's description of the above-ground entrance at the palace.
The palace of the living and the dead was built for the use of the high priest of the Zapotecs. They built this magnificent house, or pantheon, in the shape of a rectangle, with portions rising above the earth and portions built down into the earth, the latter in the hole or cavity which was found below the surface of the earth.
So already this is important because just from this little blurb, we can understand that the palace was built on top of an already existing subterranean cavity. And it's into this subterranean cavity that he would now proceed.
I carefully examined these monuments some 30 years ago in the chambers above ground, which are constructed of the same size and in the same way as those below ground. There were 4 chambers above ground and 4 below. The latter were arranged according to their purpose in such a way that one front chamber served as chapel and sanctuary for the idols, which were placed on a great stone which served as an altar. The second underground chamber was the burial place of these high priests, the third that of the kings of Zapotec, whom they brought hither richly dressed in their best attire, feathers, jewels, golden necklaces, and precious stones, placing a shield in the left hand and a javelin in the right, just as they used them in war. After this, the last underground chamber had a second door at the rear, which led to a dark and gruesome room. This was closed with a stone slab which occupied the whole entrance. Through this door, they threw the bodies of the victims and of the great lords and chieftains who had fallen in battle.
And so now a clearer picture starts to emerge. We get 2 mirror palaces, the same above as below, except for that last room. The last underground chamber had a second door at the rear of it, closed with a giant stone slab. Beyond this last slab is where he's describing the victims being thrown. These victims he's mentioned of sacrificial victims from battle. Now, what lay beyond that stone slab is the subject of much debate, and this is where the true mystery of Lyobaa comes into play. Here is Francisco's account.
The wicked priests taught those who were suffering from infirmities or from their labors that here they might hope for a happy life, and they let them in alive among those sacrificed, allowing them to enter by that door and walk about in that terrible place, seeking repose among their ancestors, and allowing this by favor, they withdrew attendance and departed from the opening, and replaced the stone. The miserable creature, then wandering about in this dark abyss, perished of hunger and thirst, the sufferings of hell to which he was condemned, beginning at the time he was left. To this terrible place they gave the name Lyobaa, from that of the town.
This is a truly terrifying thought of going down into this mountain, past the stone slab, into just the subterranean cavern that was already there before they built the palace, and just being shut in to wander around in the darkness. I mean, that does really freak me out. I mean, if that's what they wanted, I guess that's a good thing, but it is absolutely terrifying to imagine, at least from an outside perspective. And that's how Francisco felt. He was a little freaked out by all this. And being a member of the church, as I mentioned to you earlier, he already felt like, it was his job to save all these people. And so his account continues.
When later there fell upon these people the light of the gospel, its servants took much trouble to instruct them, and to find out whether this error common to all these nations still prevailed. And they learned from the stories which had been handed down that all were convinced that this damp cavern extended more than 30 leagues underground, and that its roof was supported by pillars. And there were people, zealous prelates, anxious for knowledge, who, in order to convince these ignorant people of their error, went into this cave, accompanied by a large number of people bearing lighted torches and firebrands, and descended several large steps. They soon came upon many great buttresses, which formed a kind of street. They had prudently brought a quantity of rope with them to use as guiding lines, that they might not lose themselves in this confusing labyrinth. And The putrefaction and bad odor and the dampness of the earth were very great, and there was also a cold wind, which blew out their torches. And after they had gone a short distance, fearing to be overpowered by the stench or to step on some poisonous reptiles, of which some had been seen, they resolved to go out again, to completely wall up this back door of hell. The four buildings above ground were the only ones which still remained open, a court and chambers like those underground, and the ruins of these have lasted even to the present day.
And this ends Francisco's account. Apparently, he and his men did see a giant cavern down there of literally unknown depth, and they did seal it off, according to him, anyway. But what does modern analysis show? I mentioned to you that recent studies had been done on the area. What can that possibly tell us about what awaits us beneath the ruins of Lyobaa? He mentioned that the locals thought it extended for 30 leagues. Is that even possible? In 2022, a team of researchers led by the Mexican National Institute of History and Anthropology, as well as the National Autonomous University of Mexico and the Arc Association, began the first major investigation of the underground tunnel system of Lyobaa using non-invasive means, mainly relying on electric resistivity tomography, or ERT, which allows them to basically take pictures of the ground from above. And as I'm sure you can tell from some of these images, they were absolutely delighted with what they found. Clear evidence of subterranean cavities and possible tunnels underneath the ruins of Mitla, underneath Lyobaa, just where the accounts always said they would be. Not only that, but underneath the church that the Spanish built that still stands, directly under the altar. A large cavity. The main entrance, almost certainly. But that just raises the question still, what lies down there? As of now, because they don't want to tear apart the church, they haven't been able to actually go down into the tunnels, as I record this anyway in 2024. But with these conclusive findings, they are planning actual archaeological digs there soon, meaning that the portal of Lyobaa, the eternal place of rest of the Zapotec, may be opened again in our lifetime. And I think that's a good thing. Even me, a person who I admit is kind of creeped out by the idea of anything subterranean and anywhere. Because as scary and alarming as Francisco's account of all this is, it obviously should have never been left up to him or any of the Spaniards to decide whether this tunnel system should be shut up or not. I'm a Christian myself, meaning I choose to believe in Jesus. I also choose to believe that everyone has the right to make their own spiritual choices. And the fact is, no matter how scary his story makes it sound, people must have still wanted to get in there or they wouldn't have needed to shut it up in the first place. And if it is open in our lifetime, then I can't imagine what we might get to learn, archaeologically speaking, from whatever's down there. And even if someday when the tunnels are open, I am way too chicken to ever go, because I definitely would be, I think that's okay, because I don't think they were ever made for me in the first place. And even if once people do go down there, it's just as scary as the account sounds like, or even scarier if it's the scariest, worstest thing you could possibly ever imagine finding out about the Zapotec or Mexico or anything, whatever. All cultures have their skeletons in the closet. All people and all places have their dark sides. And I have to say, just given the even very little amount I've learned about the Zapotec in researching this episode, I truly don't think that even the darkest corners of their past could ever change how beautiful and inspiring of a people that they are. And that means it's both the end of our time here and the end of my story. And thank you so much for being here for the story of Lyobaa. Whenever we go into the crazy world of our past, we can see things that confuse us or upset us or even scare us a little. But if we're feeling anything about our history, then I think that means it matters to us. And I think that that's beautiful. And I hope you know that when I said thank you before, that it wasn't just for your views, but for your compassion, your curiosity, and your humanity. Because if you have an interest in our human history, that means that you do have all these qualities, and I'm very happy that you do. If you find yourself particularly interested in our topic today, then please don't let my words be the last words you hear on the Zapotec. As you heard me say earlier, you'll find a full source list for today's episode pinned to the top comment below, just like always, but please don't stop there. And your local library might have an awesome book on the history of Mexico, or on the history of some other cool place, or just on the history of something just weird and rad. I found a book on the history of cheese at my local library recently, and it just made my day. Just go to your library already. Just go. Just be one of the cool kids. For once, be one of the cool kids and go to the library. And guys, thank you so much for being here. Be safe, be happy, go with all my love. Until next time, goodbye.